So, ladies, being gay, it's hard. Not only do you have to see all of the 15 seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, plus All Stars, but you also have to pretend that you know something about interior decoration. But I think the most insidious problem of all, it's homophobia and transphobia. Are you shocked? Because I'm not. LGBTQ plus rights have been on the rise in the past few decades. More countries have been more accepting of same-sex marriage, and at the same time, there is higher acceptance of queer people in different parts of the world. But still, there's some things that persist. And that thing is idiots, in all shapes and sizes. As a veteran homosexual myself, I can tell you that homophobia and transphobia take many shapes. From your favorite politician saying that you cannot say the word gay out loud, or some of the most influential people out there saying that cisgender is a slur. And you can also have forms of homophobia and transphobia that are closer to you, like your Aunt Priscilla, that believes that all children should be far away from all of the homosexuals because they are all mentally ill and they should be homosexual in private. So first of all, Priscilla, as a homosexual myself, I hate children. Second of all, I never leave my house. I don't want to be in public spaces. And third of all, you, Priscilla. Yet, in all of the nonsense that Aunt Priscilla says, there is a small grain of truth that I would like to talk about in this video. Don't click away, I have a point. The point that I want to rescue is that, statistically speaking, LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be mentally ill than the rest of the population. When we look at different studies, consistently for the past 20 years, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and... no puedo decir transsexual. So when we compare the gays with the heterosexuals, consistently we see that lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people are more likely to develop mental illnesses such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorders, eating disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorders, among others. So,
what the fuck is going on in here on this day?
Are the gays inherently more predisposed to develop illnesses because of their morally questionable lifestyle? No, Priscilla. Only idiots, homophobes, and transphobes would think this way. Unsurprisingly, these mental health inequalities between the gays and the heterosexuals persist because of homophobes and transphobes, such as politicians, such as people in power, such as extremely wealthy people with a lot of money and influence, and also your Aunt Priscilla. So these idiots are practically creating environments that are inhabitable by queer people. So this environment, so your day-to-day life is full of unnecessary stressors, which are a product of homophobia and transphobia, aka gay stress, aka minority stress. So this is the topic that I want to discuss in this video. In this video, I want to take a closer look at minority stress and how it's killing thousands, if not millions of queer people out there, and nobody seems to be talking about this when we're talking about queer rights and pride. So most of this discourse out there, in my opinion, when we're talking about homophobia and transphobia, is that, and I'm paraphrasing it, that you should not be homophobic or transphobic because it's morally wrong or it's not correct. But I want to provide a little bit more nuance and say that it's not only that it's morally incorrect, but it's homophobia and transphobia are actually a public health hazard. There's a public health crisis where we're talking about queer people. However, I do not see often the health implications being discussed. So if you believe that homophobia and transphobia are real issues that should be confronted and you care deeply for the homosexuals in your life, strap in so we can see what we can do about gay stress and see what we can do about your Aunt Priscilla. I love this drink.
I love that drink.
The idea that stress can make you sick is nothing new at all. However, its applications on queer people and minorities in general, it's quite new. Research started in the mid-90s to early Y2Ks, where many researchers were able to pinpoint the idea that queer people are in fact more likely to develop mental illnesses or even physical illnesses when compared to heterosexuals. And again, it's not that the gays are inherently predisposed to these illnesses because they stan Lady Gaga and they cried in the Renaissance World Tour. There's an academic consensus that these mental health inequalities based on sexual identities are mainly because of the stress that homophobic violence, discrimination, and stigma creates in the day-to-day lives of many queer people. And I think many people underestimate the ability that many socially awkward people have, such as academics, of critiquing every single little thing. They have more comments than questions. So the term minority stress was coined by Giga Gay Chad Mayer. I think he's gay. I'm not sure. He's most likely gay. So Mayer coined the term minority stress in 2003 to explain the idea of how homophobia and transphobia create unique types of challenges that elicit some types of behaviors and responses in queer people, and this creates certain levels of stress and uncertainty which are more likely for them to develop a certain type of illness. Minority stressors, they create a heavy burden on the homos because it adds up to all of the other general stressors that they have to endure. That is work-related stressors, the stress of being on traffic, the stress of needing to pay your rent, of getting food, among others. So all of these type of stressors together create a fertile ground for health problems. So in short, minority stress puts more gasoline on the fire of an increasingly stressful life and existence.
Ru, my pussy's on fire.
So what are these stressors, you may ask? There are distal type of stressors and proximal type of stressors. Distals meaning far away. So these are things that are being done to you or to the minority person. So we're talking about here when institutions or people are violent or discriminatory against the homos. Here we're talking about discriminatory laws and policies, violence, discriminations, microaggressions. So picture the closest thing that we have on earth resembling hell. Florida. You cannot say gay, you cannot show anything that it's gay. It's basically hell. The second type of stressors are proximal stressors, that is, that happen within or close to the person or the minority person. So they happen internally. And this type of processes can be divided into three main categories. So the first one is internalized homophobia. That is when you swallow, not that type of swallowing, when you metaphorically swallow all of the homophobic violence and discrimination and you internalize it and you start to believe it and even to reproduce it. To see internalized homophobia in action, you just need to log into Grindr, where you're gonna see, in this case, literal swallowing of mask for mask, no homo men. That sentence is indeed grammatically correct. The second is perceived discrimination. This is where the minority person has a heightened expectation of rejection because of their minority position in society, because you're extremely aware of the stigma surrounding your sexual or gender identity. An example of perceived discrimination is when you start a new job or you go to a new place, a new school, you have a new landlord. Is that feeling of anxiety and dread if they're gonna clock you.
Not a self-can clock.
And if you're able or not to feel safe and disclose your identity with this particular person, if it's needed or not, or they're gonna find out or not. This type of internal dialogue and monologue and anxiety is at the core of perceived discrimination. So the third and last stressor is identity concealment. This is the ability or not to hide your queerness from those surrounding you as a way to avoid discrimination and stigma altogether. For this, you just need to log into Grindr so you can see the sea of headless, discreet torsos that they want to get laid, but they do not want to publicly face that they are, in fact, a homosexual. But also, take the last stressor, identity concealment, with a huge caveat. Identity concealment is an adaptive strategy used by many queer people in order to avoid discrimination and violence, and is very important specifically in specific type of cultural context such as Saudi Arabia. But again, identity concealment is not the best strategy because also it comes with a lot of hypervigilance and hyper awareness of all of your mannerisms, and you're always thinking every time that you go to a new place, like, do these people know that I suck? And these type of intrusive thoughts. So the idea here is that all of these type of stressors that I just mentioned can get under your skin and then can affect important parts of your life and biology. Specifically, they can impact you in three ways. They can impact your cognitive and affective functioning, they can affect your behavior, and they can affect your physiology. So gay stress can impact your cognitive ability. That is because many gay people are always constantly ruminating and thinking about their identity because they live in a society that does not welcome them. So it's an adaptive strategy that that has devastating consequences for people's health. And this also leads to hypervigilance of all of your mannerisms, hypervigilance of all of the pronouns you refer when you're talking about partners. It can also impact your behaviors because many homos are more prone to loneliness. They have experienced rejection from friends and family. They're also less likely to interact with those people surrounding them because of fear of violence and discrimination. Minority stressors can also impact the way your physiology works. So minority stressors can also increase the production of cortisol being the hormone that causes stress. It can also increase the reactivity of your cardiovascular system. It can dysregulate your immune system, and even it can cause aging, cellular aging in particular. So thank God for retinol. So all of these minority stressors and all of these consequences that it have for your mind, body, and interpersonal relationship cause a higher levels of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, OCD, among other mental illnesses. And again, we're not only talking about mental illnesses here. Sexual minorities, compared to heterosexuals, are more likely to report poor health outcomes, have a higher likelihood of suffering from disability, and from complaining of physical limitations. Sexual minority women report higher levels of obesity, asthma, heart disease, and breast cancer. Sexual minority men report higher levels of HIV infections, of anal cancer, of lymphoma, and of headaches. So basically, the homos are being and not in a good way. Also, minority stress seems to be getting worse. That is that the younger queers report higher levels of minority stress when we compare them to their older counterparts. First of all, regardless of sexual orientation, there is a mental health epidemic in the young, so that could be contributing. Second of all, probably the older people had it worse than the younger ones in terms of homophobic violence and discrimination. So the older people are just vibing. And the third one is that even though that it's great and fantastic and we should be continue pushing the visibility of queer people and LGBT rights, visibility not only brings protections and recognitions and acceptance, but it also increases a lot of attention and hate to these particular types of groups. So more visibility has gathered a lot more hate, and we're extremely more exposed to it because Twitter. So, to my fellow homos in the audience, the best thing that you can do to combat minority stress in the young population is to get them a daddy or a mommy. It's not me who is saying it, it's science. Daddies save a twink. I wish I could say that it doesn't get any worse than this, but it does. You see, queer people are not a monolith, so depending on the type of queer or the flavor of queer that you are, levels of minority stress can be higher or lower. So, if you're queer, gender diverse, trans, femme, poor, black, Muslim, have a disability, still use Tumblr in 2023, you are a minority within a minority. Trans and gender non-conforming people are likely to report worse mental health outcomes than their lesbian and gay counterparts. Black queer people experience the stressors of being queer and of being black, and they also experience the unique experiences of being rejected by the queer community because of racism. At the same time, we have the experiences of sexual minority women, or about queer women, who do not only experience the discrimination of being queer, but they also experience many of the difficulties of living under the patriarchy. Overall, gay stress sums up or adds up to other experiences of stress and inequalities, creating a hellscape of cortisol and obstacles to those who are already vulnerable, and making them more prone to be sick. But minority stress or gay stress is just one explanation. It is important to note that minority stress is not the only explanation for the health inequalities between the gays and the heterosexuals. Oh nay nay. The day that social scientists agree on something is the day that I will turn straight. And let's say that I haven't been near a vagina since 1994. So minority stress is not the only epidemic. Many queer people like proper and good access to doctors and practitioners. Like, many doctors do not know anything about queer healthcare, and it shows. And the problem is not the doctor itself, it's because they have not been trained to do so. Therefore, queer patients are more likely to feel misunderstood or even discriminated when dealing with certain types of doctors. Many queer patients are more likely to hide or not tell to their doctors certain type of very vital information, not to reveal their identity because they do not feel comfortable with the doctor. Like ladies, it is important for the doctor to know if you use condoms or not while in your orgy, regardless if it is a straight or a gay orgy. At the same time, some other queer patients are more likely not even to go to the healthcare systems. But again, this is not the fault of the queer patient. They just do not feel safe enough because of the risk of being mistreated, discriminated, or being rejected. And yes, like this is a call for medical practitioners and healthcare practitioners to be trained in queer issues, not because queer people are biologically different than heterosexuals. It is because queer people and people in general practice or engage in different activities or in different behaviors. So different behaviors may result in different health outcomes. So for example, for those who practice anal sex, sorry mom, some health practitioners may recommend for a routine pap test to assess the risk of cancerous cell up in the rectum. So this type of procedure, it is important for those who engage in anal sex. It can be gay men, it could be straight women, or it can be straight men who enjoy to be pegged. In my training as a psychologist and working in public hospitals, I've never heard about this until there was a doctor who worked in queer topics that actually taught me about this. Like, you're telling me that I am entitled to go to visit my doctor so he can shove an instrument up my and this is gonna be covered by insurance? Girl, sign me up. And speaking of health insurance, many queer people not only lack access to proper practitioners, but they also lack access to proper and good health care. Many queer people are often denied or do not often access good health insurances because one of the most popular or most well-known ways of getting health insurance is through your partner. So if your partner is employed and their employer offers them very good health insurance, same-sex couples may not be actually able to access this health insurance, leaving one of the partners of this relationship uninsured. At the same time, like getting a good health insurance that also covers gender-affirming surgery, they're probably inaccessible from the majority of people. Discriminatory social policies also make it very difficult for queer people to access health insurance, making it difficult for them to do standard procedures such as pre-screening diagnosis of important diseases or even treatment of pre-existing conditions. For example, it could be very difficult for a health insurance to take you over and cover the medical expenses of, let's say, your HIV medication and treatment if you were diagnosed with HIV in the past. Also, difficulties accessing or getting a health insurance can make it difficult or almost near impossible to approach mental health interventions. So it could be very difficult also to mitigate the effects of minority stress in your mental health when you don't have access or you cannot pay for a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And girl, I have some tea about the queer community. So, the queer community, it's not all fun and games. Like, yeah, there is fun for fun, and the gays do like games, but a common response for minority stress is to engage in many of the activities that have been normalized in the LGBTQ+ community. It is important to preface that not all of the queer people are the same, not all of the queer spaces are the same, and not all of the queer people act the same way. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the current state of most queer spaces nowadays is that they're pretty much all of them are based on nightlife. The thing is that when you only have night places available as a way to find some reprieve from homophobia and transphobia, there could be some collateral damage to people's health. It's not that inherently substance, alcohol, and cigarette are gonna have a negative effect on your health, but many minority stressors push people not to engage in these activities just for fun, but they push people to engage in these activities to cope against many of the emotional difficulties of being stigmatized. And at the same time, the presence of a lot of alcohol and a lot of substances in these particular environments can push people to engage in risky sexual activities, increasing their likelihood of catching an STI. So again, it's not that there's something inherently dirty or bad about sex or drugs or alcohol or anything like that. Maybe the mind space where how we approach this type of activities, not as a way to express ourselves and have fun, but as a way to cope maybe that state of mind is not the best way to approach certain types of activities. Also, most of the queer spaces, specifically queer nightlife spaces, are dominated by a particular type of person. And because English is my second language, I am not very eloquent enough to describe what is happening here. So take a look at this image. Do you by any chance see a pattern? Like, these spaces are a perpetual circuit party populated by white, jock, mask for mask men with a couple of minority twinks. The second circle of hell, if you will. These spaces pretty much push away and leave many gender diverse women, people of color outside, practically leave them to fend for themselves. And those who remain in this type of places are more likely to develop body image issues and even eating disorders. Because, let's face it, there's only one body type that is acceptable in this type of places. Like, why do you think all of the gay men go to the gym? It's not only because they want to do something unholy in the locker rooms. So yeah, sometimes, even when you're a minority, the call can be coming from inside the house. The house down boots, yes God. I also think it's particularly symptomatic of certain queer people, specifically the young and the chronically online, that a way in order to respond to minority stress, they do it by being extremely hateful and malicious in online spaces. Like, you just need to see all of the hateful messages that some of the contestants of RuPaul's Drag Race get. Like, it is insane. Like, I would say that this is a particular way of coping with gay stress, and you do that at the expense of triggering the minority stress to other people. So it's kind of like picking at a wound that should be left alone. I really do not think that the mental health inequalities between the gays and the straights is just because they did 5 rounds of shots, they did poppers, and they saw their favorite drag queen being eliminated.
Kennedy, with great power comes milk.
I think that's just like 5% of the whole equation. The remaining comes from the lack of awareness of queer issues for medical health practitioners, the lack of access to health insurance, and of course, the silent epidemic of gay or minority stress. Queer health inequalities add up to the other well-documented health inequalities experienced by women and people of color. And girl, if you're queer, femme, black, low status, the amount of stress that you have to endure and the consequences that it has for your health. Like, the best option might not be to go to a doctor. I think the best intervention should be to throw a protest, a parade, or even a pie. Or you can also do what people like me do, try to wait and pray for a big fat penis. So, in order for queer people to live and exist in peace, they cannot sit down and wait for change to happen. Because if they do so, the best case scenarios for them is illness, and the worst case scenario is death. So that is why queer people will and should get together with their local and international queer communities and demand for change. That's why we have Pride. Pride, it is a small remedy, an intervention, a treatment for the stage 4 cancer that it is homophobia and transphobia. So ladies, girlies, friends, if you made it so far through this video, it's because you consider that homophobia and transphobia should be treated and should be eradicated. And you may be wondering, how? Well, I don't know, girl, I'm just a YouTuber. However, I do have some ideas. So basically, gay stress, minority stress should be addressed at the macro level, at the interpersonal level, and at the individual level. So in terms of the macro level, we're talking about laws and policy. But let's be honest for a second. When we ask for better laws and political systems and we do not do nothing, it's like basically praying for Rihanna to drop her new album. It's not gonna happen, girl. So one of the things that you can do is being informed and be aware of who you vote for and what are their policies in terms of LGBTQ+ rights. You may be asking, well, running a country is not only about the gays. And I agree, it's not only about the gays. Politicians have other things to do, like stealing. I think it's important to zoom out and take into consideration that you're not only voting for somebody that's gonna take care for queer people, you're voting for somebody that has a plan on how to address and how to take care of those who are vulnerable. Like, the government is not only about talking about the economy, the military, control, and power. The government is also about protecting and health. Like hell, even the most rational of the Sigma males, Daddy Freud, said that we need to balance our impulses from aggression and caring, our thanatos and our eros. And I'm saying all of this because I can guarantee you that you would like to know exactly how the vulnerable people are going to be taken care of, because in the future, when you become old, your physical body becomes more limited, you become dependent, you acquire a physical disability, that you will want to know how you're going to be taken care of and how that will be for people who are vulnerable. So inform yourself of who are you voting for, because if not, you may as well be suffering the stress of being a minority or the stress of being dependent on somebody who does not give a about you. When that day comes, we will tell you, welcome to the club.
Hi, gay.
Additionally, and by all means, pop off queen, put rainbows everywhere, kiki with all of the homos and transes all you want, go to protests, and most importantly, donate. I think it's also important to consider the laws and policies. They are vital. They're important to ensure equality between sexual minorities, gender minorities, and straight people and cis people. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that their effects can be extremely slow moving. So the laws and policy that they may pass today, maybe we can start seeing their effects down the line. So they may not offer an immediate reprieve of all of the gay stress being experienced by many queer people. This is why we should also target at the interpersonal level and at the individual level. Like, yeah, don't be a but also don't be a bystander. When you hear something transphobic or homophobic within your vicinity, step up, say something, do something. I am talking to you specifically, the allies. Addressing this type of homophobia and transphobia constantly can prove to be dangerous for many queer people on a day-to-day basis. So one of the best ways for you to be an ally is when you see this happen, don't let it fly, intervene immediately. And there are two ways that you can do it. There is the public sphere and the private sphere. So in the public sphere, when you see a politician saying stupid thing, or when you see your favorite author coming out bravely as a bigot and defending the sanctity of the large gametes.
The woman is the producer of the large gametes.
So you need to ask yourself, what is more important? Someone's opinion or the livelihood and the health of your so-called queer friends and family? I hope it's not hard to answer, because if it's hard to answer, baby, we don't want you. All of these interactions, tweets, and harassment and violence in the public sphere fill us with dread and stress. So if you see this happening to one of your queer friends or colleagues, the best way to intervene is to boycott them, belittle them, or block them. There is no point in reasoning with these people. They're far gone, and they're not gonna admit that they're wrong in Twitter, for f***'s sakes. As my dark mother once said,
people like Michael Knowles and Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump cannot be persuaded. They have to be defeated.
So if you encounter this rhetoric in your private life with friends, family, co-workers, one of the best ways to address it is to step up and have difficult conversations. People are more likely to be persuaded when they look like them, when they think like them, when they have something in common. So say something in private, try to change their mind, because they were more likely to hear you than to hear somebody like me. This is especially true for those people who are in a position of power. If you're in a position of power, for example, in a work environment, you can push for a more inclusive work environment. That way, clients and employees can feel more welcome and less stressed. I know Pride Month, inclusive language, pronoun usage, I know it can be difficult and there are many things to understand and get, but like, Kim, people are dying. As a philosopher once said,
Step your pussy up, honey. Get a job. Own a business, bitch. Suck a dick.
Get it together, girl. So, story time. One of my family members told me that when I was 5, both of my parents took me to therapy because they thought that something was wrong with me. And that wrong thing was that they thought that I was gay. I wonder why. So they took me to the therapist, they did evaluations, screenings, intelligence tests, and after the results were done, the therapist said both of my parents and told them that I was perfectly fine, there was nothing wrong with me, and I did not need therapy. But they did. Like, that is shade. And people think allyship is boring. No, you can be a shady ass and you will have the best community to support you. And this was in the 90s. I'm old. Like, these are the type of allies that we need. This is not only for the straights, but this is also for gay people out there. Stop being one of those pick-me gays in the sense that they want to be different by saying that bisexual people do not really exist or that trans people are making us look bad and saying stupid things such as, we're not the LGBTQ plus community, I am LGB. Sweetie, I have some news for you. Because when people in power and transphobe stop taking the rights of trans people in different parts of the world, they're gonna direct their attention to you. So do not be a dick and do not be an ass. But I guess that's hard for some of you because you are what you eat. And lastly, for my fellow queers, one thing that I have learned while doing my PhD thesis for the past 4 to 5 years is that a good way to protect your mental health is to join the local LGBTQ plus community. That's it, that's my thesis. Like, this is not Grindr, this is not Scruff. Here we're talking about your local LGBTQ plus community centers and spaces. So while striving for equality and political change, one thing that may help weather the storm of gay stress or minority stress is connecting with your fellow homos. I'm also saying that to myself because I never leave the house. I'm laughing, but it's true. Another way is for queer people to put their voices out there and to create things that they want to see in the world. This is especially true for gender diverse people and queer people of color. By creating content, by creating art, by putting your voice out there, you can tell everybody about your needs in order to help improve the lives for the most vulnerable people of the queer community. So in short, we need everyone and everything in order to help address the public health crisis that it is gay stress. So the next time your Aunt Priscilla says something homophobic and transphobic, not only tell her that she's an idiot, but have the difficult conversation of telling her why she's an idiot. And if you want to take it a step further, show her season 5 of Drag Race and show her the ultimatum queer love so she can actually see gay stress in display. So again, thank you everybody, and thank you all of those who made it this far in the video. If you're interested in seeing more gay click on the next link, and this is my video of me talking about one of the most invisible groups of queer people out there, queer migrants. Again, thank you so much and see you in the next one.